This is Ron Peters.
I'm John Nugent.
And I'm Sam Long. Welcome to the After Class Podcast.
Because the best conversations happen
after class.
Thanks for joining us on another episode of the After Class Podcast. We're glad to have you along. This podcast brought to you by the indoor air conditioning units of Great Lakes Christian College.
Today we're coming to you from the first circle of hell.
No, it's not that hot.
It's hot enough. Well, that's why I said the first circle.
Ron's office, the air's down. It's fine everywhere else in the building, just not in Ron's office apparently.
Apparently there's something wrong with the thermostat. I keep trying to get it turned on, and there's nothing happening.
Yeah,
so
it's not operator failure. No chance.
Yeah. So right. So I've communicated to the necessary people, and hopefully we can get it looked at here pretty soon. But it's a little warm.
It's not bad yet, but it's going to keep going.
Well, I mean, here we are.
3 hot heads, 3 hot in the same room.
Well, and it's, here we are yesterday was the longest, 2 days ago, was the longest day in the summer, longest day of sunlight. So we're getting into the hottest point of summer right now. This is when we want the air conditioning to be working.
I've been out in the sun the hottest parts of the day, the last 2 days.
What were you doing?
So I played disc golf at 3 in the afternoon 2 days ago, which was a mistake, but it was fine. And yesterday I was at the beach. I went over to CIY, and on Thursdays they have extended rec time, so all the youth groups go to the beach. Yeah. So I was there repping the school, and then we went to the beach. It's a rough gig,
Right.
But it was toasty.
Yeah.
The water was freezing, but the sun was hot.
It still hasn't warmed up. Yeah, it takes a while for Lake Michigan.
I think it was like
warm.
59 degrees or something.
Yeah. It's a big lake.
Yeah.
People don't understand just how big the Great Lakes are. It takes a while for them to get warm. They get warm around mid-September, I think is what it is.
Yeah. The point is I'm getting used to the hot weather. Not really, but
good for you.
My pool is just starting to warm up to be comfortable for adults. Yeah. Children were in there like a month ago.
Yeah,
but adults have, a lower tolerance for cold water, apparently.
That's part of aging. Yep.
Even with the solar cover, it's taking a little time to warm up there.
Yeah, I've been lazy about the covers. So.
I will say I've tried to start doing cold shower regimens in the morning. It's not going well.
I've heard about that. That supposedly the cold water is supposed to be good for your health, builds your immune system.
I've done it 1.5 times.
1.5?
Yeah, the second time I was like, I can't do it. I'm done. I'm done.
Have you watched that thing on Disney Channel with the guy who played Thor? What's his name? The actor who played Thor. He's been doing all these endurance tests.
Yeah,
like that. One of them was in the cold. He's in the Arctic Circle.
Good for him.
Yeah. So
pushing the limit. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, so that's all our news.
Yeah, that's right. It's hot, and we're dealing.
Yeah, weather, temperature issues.
Yeah.
Right. If we sound a little cranky as we're going along, it's just understand we're sitting in a hot room and
there's nothing
we're not happy about it.
For me.
Recording in a sauna. So.
That's right.
Well, we're starting a new series.
Speaking of hot, I don't know what that has to do with
I'm not sure it's a hot topic or a hot take.
It gets people heated.
Yes, people do get hot talking.
It is a sensitive topic.
Without a doubt.
And we've had many requests.
Multiple for the same person.
And some repeated requests. Yeah, you know who you are, Bruce. Who want us to talk about violence.
Yeah.
And in particular, Christian participation in violence. Not like divine violence or the violence of the nations, but what does the Bible say about us participating in violence, self-defense, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, they want to know, if someone breaks into my house, can I shoot them?
Right.
That's probably not how they would frame it, but
yeah.
But I feel that those kind of questions as well. It's more like self-protection, protecting your family, protecting your goods.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so this, like usual, this is a big topic, and there's a lot of biblical material that's related to it. And it's another topic that people just people who haven't done their homework do really shabby jobs of representing their position. People who are for nonviolence, they know a couple of verses from the Sermon on the Mount. That's pretty much their full case.
Yep.
Right, yeah.
Either you take Jesus seriously or you don't. or there are people that are Jesus can't possibly mean this because in the Old Testament, God had him killing everyone, and Joshua and the Conquest. Therefore, sure, I should be able to kill people as long as I'm killing the right people, right? and both are just really bad ways, right, of framing this topic. Because this topic, lots of topics, is a complex one that is best appreciated when you trace the theme throughout the whole Bible story.
Yeah.
Because part of our participation in violence is impacted by where are we at in salvation history? Right. What is the mission, the specific mission to which God has called us to right now? and how does self-defense or keeping crime down around us fit into that,
Right.
right? And that might be different at different times of salvation history. But there is, because God is the same yesterday, today, and forever, we don't anticipate to be wildly fluctuating.
Mm-hmm.
But we do know that certain things develop over time, and we want to wrap our head around that.
Yep. Agree.
So we're going to do what we always do, go back to the beginning.
In the beginning.
And this, this first session, it may have a lot of overlap with when we did a session a long time ago. I think in the Rhett and Link series, one of their objections to God or problems they have with the God of Scripture is that he's a violent God. And we spent time kind of in the Old Testament talking about what is violence to God. And so we did, that series was focused on God and not so much humans.
Yeah.
But some of the same foundational material from the Old Testament is relevant to both subjects.
Yeah. Agreed.
But rather than just referring you back to that one, we're going to hit it fresh again. But if you feel like you want to hear more about these passages or this topic in the Old Testament foundation, we encourage you to go back to those earlier episodes.
Sure.
And, type in divine violence in the search code and keyword search on our Libsyn website, and that should be able to take you to other episodes. But we're going to we haven't listened to those. We have no idea what we said back then. We're just going to approach it
Who can
afresh.
remember that far back?
I know. It's been years.
Maybe you can compare them and see if we've changed, evolved at all.
Maybe our position has moved a little bit. You never know.
That was years ago, so it's quite possible.
There you go.
It's always possible.
So we're going to start in Genesis.
Sure. And we'll just start with the first act of violence in the Bible, and that's in Genesis 4. And it's the story of Cain and Abel. And if you know the story, there are these brothers, and one was a shepherd and one was a gardener, or maybe farmer, might be a better way of putting it.
Wow, that kind of hurts.
I know.
I'm not going to lie there, Sam.
I was
That
looking
hurts
at
a bit.
Ron when I said it. And so Cain, not happy that his sacrifice was not looked upon as highly as his brothers, went after his brother. And so I guess I'll just read it, and we can talk about it.
Yep.
So starting in verse 8, it says, Cain said to his brother Abel, "Let's go out to the field." And when they were in the field, Cain rose up against his brother Abel and killed him. Then Yahweh said to Cain, "Where is your brother Abel?" He said, "I don't know. Am I my brother's keeper?" And the Lord said, "What have you done? Listen, your brother's blood is crying out to me from the ground. And now you are cursed from the ground, which has opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. So when you till the ground, it will no longer yield to you its strength, and you'll be a fugitive and a wanderer on the earth." And Cain said to the Lord, "My punishment is greater than I can bear. Today you have driven me away from the soil, and I shall be hidden from your face. I shall be a fugitive and a wanderer on the earth, and anyone who meets me may kill me." Then the Lord said to him, "Not so. Whoever kills Cain will suffer a sevenfold vengeance." And the Lord put a mark on Cain, so that no one who came upon him would kill him. And Cain went away and settled in Nod, and the story moves on. And so the story just shows that where there's this desire creeping at the door, Cain fails to master it, and he reacts with violence and ends up killing his brother. And the result is, interestingly, is that the soil, the very ground, has been contaminated, we might say, or violated would probably be a better understanding from sort of religious perspective. And it's almost like that's the reason why he can't be a farmer anymore, is because he's destroyed the ground. And of course, Cain is like, wait a minute, that's my livelihood.
Yeah.
And wait a minute, if I'm wandering around, or if I can't grow anything, now I'm going to be this like Bedouin wanderer. People are going to kill me. And then God says, well, I'll protect you, and puts a mark on him. And so this is kind of a interesting foray into the understanding of violence, because this was an unprovoked attack.
Yep.
There's no one can defend Cain for this.
Right.
And he committed this act of violence, and there were consequences as a result.
Yeah. And it is interesting, as we see this is the first real instance of sin beginning to really play out among humanity. And we could talk about Eve giving birth and all that, but the first really big story of sin beginning to emerge culminates in an act of violence, in an act of death. And as you said, it was unprovoked. It's not like Abel did anything to deserve it. It was the exact opposite. He was just trying to be faithful to God. But Cain's response is to kill him. His very faithfulness to God is so offensive to him that the only thing he can do is just get him out of the way. But I like what you said, Sam. You made a very good point about how it's not just he committed an act of violence, but this act of violence is having a contamination effect upon the earth to where you can't do your job anymore. And as we're thinking about the nature of sin, this is an important story for understanding how sin manifests itself and the effect that it has upon the world around us. And I think that people often underappreciate what this story is trying to sell us, trying to tell us.
Interesting.
Boy, that was a bad one. And so I appreciate you bringing out those points, not to try to sell us something.
And I think it's one of the more important points of the passage is there is a connection between our, stewardship of one another's lives and our stewardship of the land. We think of violence always as, especially when you get into, what would you do if someone broke into your house and did this?
Right.
Would you kill them? Right? If you had a gun, would you do, they always kind of isolate the factors as there's two people and the one has a chance to kill the other, or they both have a chance to kill each other. Who's going to kill each other first, right?
Right.
And it's always divorced from the implications of this death for wider society.
Yeah.
Right? And just the first act of death, it impacts creation. And it has ripple effects for wider society, because Cain is, he's a little bit paranoid about now that, word's going to get out that I killed Abel and people are going to come after me. And so automatically killing is not just an individual affair.
Yeah.
It impacts your relationship with the soil, which for Cain was really connected to his relationship with God. Like his worship revolved around the soil. And God was trying to train him to worship him better with how he treats the soil and offers the soil, right? Like by approving more of the way Abel did his offering, right? He's kind of sending a message to Cain about, you've got to do better for me, right? Your vocation matters. And so his relationship with God is wrapped up in his killing of his brother, his relationship with the soil and his vocation, and as it turns out, his relationship with all of wider society.
Yep.
Yeah.
Killing is a big deal.
Right.
It is. And I think we see God's attitude towards killing as well, because now you talked about Cain's paranoia. He's like, oh, great, I've killed somebody, now people are going to kill me. Well, what's God's response? He's like, no, I don't want that to happen. God does not just sort of indiscriminately approve of violence. In fact, he takes steps to make sure that the cycle of violence doesn't continue. He wants it to stop. You did a bad thing and bad stuff is going to pursue you now, but I don't want people killing you. And so God's immediate response is to say, I'm going to make it so people don't do that to you. And that tells us a little bit about God's attitude as well. He's trying to curb the violence, not to encourage it, but to get it to stop.
Yeah, if we were to locate the question of, what should I do if, someone bad is a threat to my life? When we read this story, we're like, Cain, he's the bad one, and then, but that's not me. I don't want to be a Cain. No one wants to be a Cain.
Wouldn't think so.
But lots of people want to be the people Cain is afraid of.
Yeah.
Right? Like, we think that, if there are other people in our world who are a threat to our family or a threat to our livelihood, then we start to feel a little more justified. That's when we start making the case for justified participation in violence.
Yeah.
Right? And so where we are in the story, if we're still listening to this podcast, we're not able. But no one wants to be Cain. Everyone kind of agrees that indiscriminate, unprovoked killing is bad. But the real question, I think, and where this story meets our desire to avenge ourselves or to keep our families safe, is in God's response to Cain's concern that wider society will consider me a threat to their livelihood, to their family, just because of what I've done in the past. They will want to kill me. What do you think of that, God? And God sides with Cain.
Yeah.
Like he does not endorse in this original instance of kind of, wider society organizing to put away killers.
Right. He
does not endorse snuffing out a killer. His desire is for the life of Cain to go on. And so it's just interesting why God didn't back the mob on this one.
Yeah.
Like, why not just say, you know what, you deserve it, Cain. You're a killer. You killed your brother. I already warned you about this. This was going to happen. You didn't listen to me. You let your anger get to you, and you did it. Now face the consequences. I'm not going to let you farm anymore, and you're going to be paranoid of other people. Good luck. But no, God goes out of his way to protect Cain, even by using the threat of violence. It's like he's saying, if I wanted to kill Cain, I would have.
Yeah. If I wanted you dead, you'd be dead, Cain. There's nothing
Right.
you can do about it.
And God does not encourage other people to take it upon themselves to set history right by ridding the earth of bad people.
Yeah.
Which to me is that part of the story, which is seldom talked about, is perhaps for the question we're considering one of the most important parts of the story.
Yeah. Well, and we get a sense of God's sense of justice, because it's not like God said, all right, we got to balance the scales of justice here. Somebody's got to pay. That's not God. He's like, again, not endorsing what he did, but saying, even you, Cain, who are a murderer, I'm going to look out for you. The long suffering, the willingness to keep working with humanity. These are very, very cool aspects about God. This is the God that I want to follow and serve. I love reading this story because it tells us so much about God's character.
Yeah, and part of that character is that grace, and that's why I tell students who say that we talked about this about the Old Testament's full of the mean, cruel God,
Right?
But like, he kicks Adam and Eve out of the garden, clothes them. He puts this mark on Cain to protect him. Like, that's not a vindictive
Right.
God. It's a gracious God who's
Yeah.
giving people lots of undeserved things
Yeah.
in a good way.
Yeah. Agree. Totally agree.
All right.
But wait,
There's more.
chapter 4 has more.
And so, we unfortunately, for the sake of human history, we see the cycle of violence continue. We get this next guy, a descendant of Cain, whose name is Tubal-Cain. I always like that name too, Tubal-Cain. That's just like a fun name. I don't know why. I just like it. Anyway, he has 2 wives. Already getting a sense of his character. We're seeing sin coming in and break down human relationships. But he says to his wives, Ada and Zillah, hear my voice. You wives of Lamech, listen to what I say. Oh, this is Lamech. Sorry, I said Tubal-Cain.
Yeah, I was wondering where you're going to tie
No,
that in.
I saw the sister of Tubal-Cain, and I obviously screwed
He
up.
was thinking of the Noah movie.
Where did I know? There was someplace I heard Tubal-Cain recently that was stuck in my head, and I just don't remember.
That's
what
my
it was.
nickname for my son. No.
Anyway,
Sorry.
Lamech, as I should have said earlier, was saying to his 2 wives, I have killed a man for wounding me, a young man for striking me. If Cain is avenged 7-fold, truly Lamech 77-fold. And so this is where I think we see the cycle of violence beginning to up its game a little bit, because he's just offended by somebody. We don't even really get the exact nature of it, except he says, a young man wounded me, he struck me. And so in response, I killed him. And, we could get into conversations of like, eye for eye and all that. He could have struck him back and just like balance the scales, but he's like, no, I'm going to take it one step further. You hurt me, I'm going to hurt you worse. That's sin justice. Sin justice says, I'm not going to just try to balance the scales. I'm going to set them to my advantage. And for Lamech, the advantage is I killed him. And in his arrogance, he's like, yeah, if anybody kills me for doing it, it's going to be even worse for them than it would have been for Cain. Just all of it here shows us that the human propensity towards a spiraling, degenerative idea of sin is just kind of getting worse and worse. And it manifests itself again in violence.
Yeah. And here, the fact that he's kind of quoting God or playing the part of God. Like,
Yep.
God stepped in as an act of grace for Cain and said, listen, you don't have to worry. I've got this mark on you that will remind everyone who sees you that if they mess with you, they're messing with me.
Yeah.
Right? And it's kind of like God is my protector. God will avenge me 7-fold. Like it's in the way God was using it, it was to limit violence, not
Right.
to justify violence.
Exactly.
Right? And so when Lamech just looks at this and hears this or does the deed, and he's anticipating that people will want to kill him the way they would have wanted to kill Cain.
Yeah.
And again, he's worried about the mob mentality, and he's escalating that. And it's 7-fold vengeance isn't enough. But by quoting God, it's kind of like here you see humanity getting in on the vengeance mode. And here it's not protection. He's not protecting himself. He's saying to everyone around him, don't mess with me. I will destroy your world.
Yeah, it's kind of the big man mentality that some people talk about, like in ancient history. Who are the people who got to be in charge? It was the big man, the guy who was bigger, stronger, or whatever. And it's just like a theory of human history, of social organization, but that the original primitive societies were always dominated by the big, strong guy. And it kind of echoes that. Whether it's true or not is debatable, but it echoes that mentality. I'm the big guy. Don't mess with me. You'll get hurt if you do, which is not a godly way of thinking. It's a very sinful way of thinking.
Yeah. So he has a big mouth.
Yeah.
To say the least.
He really ticks me off for many reasons. But like he does what unfortunately a lot of Christians do is a lot of Christians love the grace and forgiveness side of faith, but care far less about the holiness side of faith.
Yeah.
And so it's like, yeah, well, I know I wasn't supposed to kill anybody, but oh well. The good news is God's on my side, so I can do this thing, and there won't be the retribution that I deserve, and that's not okay with me, or probably God.
No, I think you're right.
Definitely God.
I don't want to speak for God, John, but if you want to.
No, Sam, I think you're right. That I think a lot of Christians don't realize how much they sound like Lamech, and that should be chilling. When I start sounding like this guy, I'm not sounding very godly, and so I don't want to like put my finger in people's chests. That'd be a bad way of doing it. But to gently say to people, listen to the words you're saying. Now go back and read Lamech. Mm-hmm. And do you really want to make this guy like the one you want to model your attitude after? Not just your life, but the very attitude of your heart. Is that where you want to go? So I think it's a very important passage to read to get people to start to think about what kind of attitudes they're adopting and where those attitudes align with God and where they don't.
Right.
So. Yeah. Well, the escalation doesn't stop here. And we should see this as an escalation. Like there was one person who killed one person. And then there's the fear of mob retaliation from the masses to kill Cain. And so then God kind of escalates it. But as God, he has the right to give and take life. If he's going to say, hey, I'm going to stop the killing here with this threat, right, hang it over, then there's an escalation there. And then Lamech just takes it even further, right? And once you start the Cain cycle, it's all about violence. Yeah. Right? The first sin was the, eating of the fruit when God said you shouldn't, right? And then the consequence of that is like people are going to be like trying to dominate each other. Mm-hmm. And that shows itself out in deadly violence. Yeah. And the culmination of this happens in chapter 6 of Genesis. And so between this episode of Lamech, you have just some kind of genealogical material. And the next narrative is the narrative leading up to the flood. And so I guess I'll start in verse 5. Then the Lord saw the wickedness of humankind was great in the earth, and that every inclination of the thoughts of their hearts was only evil continually. Yeah. And the Lord was sorry that he had made humankind on the earth, and it grieved him to his heart. So the Lord said, I will blot out from the earth the human beings that I have created, people together with animals and creeping things and birds of the air, for I am sorry that I have made them. But Noah found favor in the sight of the Lord. So this is the kind of the introduction, right? Yeah. Like wickedness has filled the earth. Mm-hmm. We're not sure what form it took, but it got so bad that God realizes he has to shut things down. Yeah. But verse 9 is going to continue. It says, these are the descendants of Noah. Noah was a righteous man, blameless in his generation. Noah walked with God, and he had 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Now the earth was corrupt in God's sight. So now we're kind of back. We're caught up again, right? Yep. And the earth was filled with violence. Yep. So now we got the specific sin that is plaguing the earth. And God saw the earth was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted its ways upon the earth. And God said to Noah, I have determined to make an end of all flesh, for the earth is filled with violence because of them. Now I am going to destroy them along with the earth. So now the wicked sin is named. Mm-hmm. And turns out it's violence, which shouldn't surprise us. If you're tracking the story so far from Cain and Abel to Lamech and the man he kills, before long, the earth is simply filled with violence. And there's something before then that we didn't talk about much, or at least in this episode. In Genesis 6, at the beginning of the chapter, it talks about the sons of God and the daughters of men. And around that time, you had the Nephilim kind of on the earth, and the Gebarim on the earth, I should say, the mighty ones, right, who are these kind of people known for their warfare-making ways.
Again, so the big man theory.
Yeah, the earth is filled with these mighty men who apparently are securing women and territory for themselves, right? And that happens with bloodshed. Like, people don't give up their women very easily, their wives, their daughters.
Yeah.
And so that's perhaps a precursor to the earth being filled with violence. Probably in that chain of escalation will be these mighty men, these warriors of renown on the earth. It's nice to have heroes and big people on the earth who can kind of kick butt and take names, and we make all sorts of movies out of them.
Sure.
And,
Your Iron Men and people like that.
Yeah.
Your Captain's America.
but in the Genesis story, this is the precursor. This is what leads to an earth filled with violence.
Yeah.
So filled with violence that the best way forward, as far as God can tell, is to destroy the earth altogether.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like you mentioned some superheroes that we make movies out of, but they're all good. What if they were not? Right?
Yeah.
What if all these people that make movies out of were actually doing the opposite? They're using it for their own advantage, not
Right.
to save the world and all that. Like, that's the situation we have here, which, of course, then is going to lead to all sorts of awful things.
Yeah. And the point we've already made, which is so good, because I think it's still underlying the story, is that it's obviously people are suffering. The reason that they're taking these wives is because of the threat of violence. It's like, become my wife or give up your daughters to be my wife, or I'm going to kill you or hurt you or whatever. I mean, it's that strength that they're using to get what they want. But it's not just the social thing, which is a problem. Okay, the social sin of it is really a problem. But as we've already pointed out, their violence has a corrupting aspect upon the very ground. It's like they're building great kingdoms, they're building these powerful societies, and I'm sure that the early readers of Genesis are thinking like Babylon and Egypt and these great empires of the ancient world. But God's trying to say to them, not only is it bad for the people, it's bad for the very ground they're walking on. And you're not producing a society that's flourishing the way that God intended people to flourish. And so that threat of violence that's allowing these people to gain tremendous power is really destroying the very societies that they're trying to create. And yes, a small group of people get the benefit, but the vast majority of people are not.
Yeah, and the way I understand what's going on with these mighty warriors on the earth is that we shouldn't necessarily think of these as like villains, like the foil to the heroes. These are probably, especially if the sons of God are people who are kind of warlords, like the early rulers, the early civilization builders, right? The people who are trying to carve the earth into territory, and this is my territory, these are my people. These sons of God and these warriors are probably working together to try to create stable societies. They may be primitive nation builders.
Yeah.
Right. And, when we think of, or when you follow the Bible story forward, the Gebarim, who are, the mighty men in early chapter 6, this is what David had. He had his mighty men that he used to consolidate his kingdom. Like back in the day, kings didn't have standing armies that were drafted from the wider populace. Like in Bible times, kings often had their own, especially in early times, kings had their own personal armies who were answerable to the king.
Yep.
The people didn't volunteer for it. It was a privileged status that came with benefits, right? You were part of the king's handpicked army. And they served the kings. And the kings are putting themselves out there of, I am the ruler who is going to bring stability and thriving and protection and make your land safe from people like Cain, from people like Lamech.
Yeah.
Like these mighty ones are potentially the equivalent of like the early form of the army, the Air Force, the Marines.
Yeah.
This is a very primitive early form of that. People trying to organize society, and other people want that land too. And so there's conflicts and there's wars and battles for lands. But what these people are probably trying to do is create a civilization for themselves. Yeah. It's continuing, not only do you have from Cain onward the story of escalating violence, you have the story of civilizations being built, right? The building of the earliest cities, right? And then, of course, right after the flood, you're going to have the Tower of Babel, which, again, is the building of a civilization, a city, a tower, and someone who wants to, stake a claim on that territory and unite them and get everyone on the same page, right? And, of course, one king, one page, one tower, one temple, one army, right? It's this unifying impulse that's behind creating societies where the violence creeps in because it all seems so justified.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's why in ancient times, and this is something outside of the Bible because you see it, I've mentioned in podcasts long ago, like the Epic of Gilgamesh, where in that story, this ancient Assyrian story, that they say the king is supposed to be a shepherd. Like that's the term that they use. The king is supposed to be a shepherd. The job of the shepherd is to provide and to protect. And so if we get the big man who is willing to keep us safe and organize us in a way that everybody gets the benefit of plenty of food and, advancing in our technology and stuff, great. Whatever sacrifice we have to make, this guy has done it for us. He's given us more territory. He's elevated our way of life and all that. Sure, we'll do it. But it's usually predicated on this idea of violence. And they're good at it. They're really good at it. We're really good at beating up the other guys and killing their people and all that stuff. And so violence is always like that undercurrent that's keeping them in their positions. And if you're on their side, great. We get the benefit of the violence, because we're on the winning team. But if you're on the other side of it, it doesn't work out so well for you. Mm-hmm. But I think your observations are right, John. It is a very early look at how you build civilizations. Again, Egypt, Babylon, the Hittite kingdom, like all the things that would have been around the Israelites at the time period of the Old Testament that eventually become like the Greek Empire, the Roman Empire. They all function on the same basic principles, and that is we do violence better than everybody else, so we're going to be the ones who are in charge.
Yeah, and more often than not, the violence is in service of a certain king or ruling class's vision of the common good.
Right. Yeah.
So this isn't I don't think the situation before the flood was just random people breaking into houses killing people.
Right, exactly.
Right? I think this is systematic organization of societies trying to carve out land for themselves, trying to make space for themselves, and bloodshed is how they do it.
Yeah. Well, and that's really important because God's trying to give Israel a sense of the world that he's building them within. God's going to create a new nation for himself, creating them from scratch. And he's like, you look around yourselves and you look at these great empires and even some of the smaller city-states. You look around them, and this is how they do business. And you need to understand that this is not part of my vision. This wasn't part of my good plan for humanity when I created the world. And so for Israel, they've got to be able to look around and say, all right, this is how the other nations do it. What is God going to try to do through us that's going to look different? How's God going to try to undo this and give the rest of humanity a vision for something different that's more in line with his good creation?
Yeah. And here I think this is building on what we saw with Cain and Abel. When Cain killed Abel, the soil was impacted, the land was impacted, and this violence is so filling the earth that it's impacting all of creation.
Yeah.
Like, why not just send a plague on the people that kills all the people? Something like the flood is needed because the ground is just being defiled. Yeah. The earth is filled with it. The soil is saturated with it. The animals are getting involved in it. And we have good reason to think, we're going to look at chapter 9 in a second, that the animals were also caught up in the violence, whether they were being killed or retaliating or something. But we're going to see that the consequence of human violence is violence done to the earth.
Yeah.
Is the earth having to be purged of all life. So this connection between blood and creation and violence is strong here in the early chapters, and it's going to show up in Torah, which we'll get to.
I don't know if this is important or not, but I feel like as you guys have been talking and sort of the way you're framing it, you guys ever watch The Walking Dead?
I have never. I've seen a few episodes early on, but I didn't watch the whole series.
So for me, as you're talking, there's so many parallels. For one, is like every time someone gets killed, they get turned into this zombie figure who is like polluting the earth. Yeah. Right? They're disgusting. They're like literally like they're so you kill them. Their blood is not red; it's black, right? And it's just like it's disgusting.
Yeah.
Right. And so that's part of this side of the whole Cain and then as well as the whole drama is built on different groups of people carving out land for themselves and carving out a territory and then fighting other humans to protect that or to get more, right? And I watch this show and I just get so mad. I'm like, you're the last humans on the planet. Can you not just say, hey, maybe we can get along? And the answer is no, both for the drama, but also for the human nature of it.
Right.
And so, like, I don't know, as you were talking, like, that's what I kept going back to my mind is, like, that's exactly what that show is, like, portraying, is humans' inability to just, like, get along, but through selfishness and all the rest, they're going to get more for themselves and like that's and so also the pollution and all the rest. Anyway, that's it. Just for our listeners out there who watch the show, maybe you make that connection as well.
Well, it is an interesting connection because, I mean, what happens when people are zombified? They just become violent. They are killers. You know, they have no mind. Their most basic instinct emerges, which is to kill. You know, and they're not like evil, indiscriminate. They're just following this essential impact. And it recognizes that violence seems to be so deeply embedded in us that when we lose our humanity, the only thing that's left is a violent tendency to, kill and eat people.
Right. So anyway, and aside.
All right. You want to continue with chapter 9?
Yes, and I also have a reference that's from like the last 10 years, not 50 years ago. Ron.
Ha, ha, ha.
So after God purifies, cleanses the land from the pollution, the contamination of violence, he has some things to say moving forward. All right, we're going to restart. Let's try not to kill each other anymore. That's my summation. But he says this, this is chapter 9, verse 1. God blessed Noah and his sons and said to them, be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth. The fear and dread of you shall rest on every animal of the earth, and on every bird of the air, and everything that creeps on the ground, and all the fish of the sea. Into your hand they are delivered. Every moving thing that lives shall be food for you. And just as I gave you green plants, I give you everything. I'll keep going. Only you shall not eat flesh with its life, that is, its blood. For your own lifeblood I will surely require reckoning. From every animal I will require it, and from human beings, each one for the blood of another. I will require a reckoning for human life. Whoever sheds the blood of a human, by human shall that person's blood be shed. For in his own image God made humankind. And so there's so much bound up in there. The first is like you said, the sort of switch that happens. So you read chapters 1 and 2 of Genesis, and it's like God's created it all. There's harmony. There's peace. If you need food, there's plants.
Yep.
Now it's, I'm going to make animals scared to death of you, and you're going to eat them.
Yeah.
Like something has switched. Something has changed since the creative order in chapters 1 and 2. And so that's the first thing we see pop out. Do you want to discuss that first and move on to something else? Or?
Yeah, I think it's a big thing. Like apparently, and we see God making certain concessions along the way in the Bible story.
Yep.
Like he has a vision for his people. They obviously can't handle it. And so he broadens his permissions a little bit, kind of meets him halfway. You want to do it like this, that's not going to work, but I'll meet you halfway. Yeah. And so, his idea was for, a plant-based diet. And that's what Genesis is very clear about in the beginning. And now he's allowing them to eat animals for food. Only you got to respect these animals.
Right.
You have to drain the lifeblood. Like there will be a reckoning for the lives that you take for having all this. Is like, how is this it's weird. Why is God having this conversation with them right after the flood? Unless eating animals for food, killing them violently, them not running out of fear of humans trying to kill them for food was a big phenomenon before the flood.
Yeah.
Right. Part of the violence that filled the earth probably involved humans got a taste for meat. And then the animals at that point apparently were not in dread of humans that wanted their meat.
Making it too easy for them.
Well, it's like city deer, right?
Right,
I can walk out of my house most nights and plunk a deer because they're just wandering around in my front yard. No fear.
Yeah, they're everywhere.
That's not really fair.
No.
It does make me think of the Noah movie because they did make that a big part of the Noah movie of these, kind of reckless, crazy guys killing animals and eating them. And Noah was really horrified that they're killing animals and eating them. So it was actually part of the Noah movie that they kind of got right.
Yeah. So so that's a big deal.
Yeah.
Like that they're talking about this animal blood and making it. So apparently before the flood they were consuming the whole animal, blood and all.
Yeah.
Right. And it was just, but this attitude that they had toward animals, apparently they were having toward humans too. That bloodshed can be indiscriminate. That life is not so sacred that you can't take it.
Yep. Life is cheap.
And so the fact that God is like starting with the animals and saying, no, even their life is sacred, right? Their life is really sacred. And so that, even when you cook it, when you prepare an animal for food, it is in many ways, it is a sacrificial act.
Yeah.
You're this draining of the blood. When you get into Torah, like the early instruction in Torah is going to be like, if you want to cook an animal for food, you got to bring it to a Levite. And they're going to slaughter the animal, ritually drain its blood. It's going to be offered up to God, and they're going to get their portion. And then you can have your meal. But this, ceremony surrounding it is supposed to reinforce kind of the sacredness of the life that you took.
Right.
Now, this is one of those concessions. So later, deeper into Torah, he's going to say, all right, it doesn't have to be a priest that does it. Other people can also do it, but you still have to follow the sacredness of the procedure of sacrificing it and draining the blood and preparing it ritually if you're going to eat an animal's flesh.
Yeah.
And so all this is a big part of it, because I think it's making the case that if animal life is so sacred to God, that you would make a big deal of how you prepare it and drain it and stuff like that, because its life is in its blood, how much more is the life of fellow humans?
Yeah.
So I think it's from a lesser to greater, a fortiori argumentation. If animal life is sacred, how much more humans who are made in God's image?
Yep. And so for people who are thinking about, who want to raise a question, well, what if somebody broke into your house? We've got to protect your family and all that. Trying to make those kinds of arguments as a justification for violence. One of the things I want those people to think about is, well, just stop and think for a moment. How much God values life. Life is so important to God that he cares about the life of animals, and that even if we kill an animal and eat it, that we've got to treat that as a sacred moment, that to drain the blood out is an act of worship. And if God cares that much about animal life, how much more does God care about the life of every human being, even the bad people, which we've seen? He cared about the life of Cain. He cares about life in general. And if God is so sort of pro-life, so to speak, to use that term, we need to think about that. Am I really going to employ violence against somebody? Am I going to shed that person's blood when that's not really God's attitude? When God even looks at the bad people and says, but I still care about their lives. That should really play a big role in the way we think about violence, and especially the shedding of blood.
Yeah, it's interesting. People often go to this passage, especially because it's like, hey, if someone kills, then you take that life, right? They go to this to say, see, bad people should be killed, right? God said it in the very beginning, bad people should be killed. Actually, no, in the very beginning, he protected the first bad person.
Right, exactly.
Cain. But, here after the flood, you see this. And so it seems like here God is just giving permission. Like whenever there's a killer out there, you got to kill him, right? And but actually, when you locate this in the storyline of escalating violence, where it went from one life for one life, Cain and Abel, and then a sevenfold vengeance, and then a 70 times sevenfold, and the whole earth is filled with violence. Here, God is reining back that escalation. If someone does kill, I understand, where you feel the need to do something about that, and because they are taking the divine life into their own hands, because every life belongs to God. These people are made in God's image. God's willing to say, all right, I understand that you want to do something about this, but it can't be this escalating violence business. It can only be life for life. So God is restraining the taking of life from sevenfold to 77, fold, 70 times sevenfold to one for one. This is a scaling back from the way things were in the world. And so I think it's another divine concession. I don't think it's God's best ideal that a killer must be killed. I mean, that's not what he does when Saul kills a bunch of Christians, right? He doesn't kill Saul.
Right, yeah.
He redeems Saul. He's, but if you see this as things are escalating and God is making a concession about the killing of animals, but he's making a concession that, all right, if you feel like you got to get rid of this person, then it's life for life. No more than that.
Yeah.
And that's the point.
Yeah, I was going to say, that's the lex talionis principle. A lot of people think lex talionis is you have to give a life for a life. It's to demand that everything equal out. It's no, it's a restraint. It is this far and no more, that you can only do equal to what happened, but you don't go beyond it. And it's just a very different way of thinking about it, different way of framing it. Okay, again, it's not a demand that you do it, but it's saying this far and no further.
Yeah, and you see this with the eye for eye and tooth for tooth.
Exactly.
Someone knocked out your tooth, you don't kill them.
Right, you can't take their arm off.
Right.
Yeah.
It should be another tooth. If they took an eye, it should be another eye.
Yeah.
It shouldn't be more than that, which is what it had become.
Yeah, that was Lamech's sin. This guy punched me, so I killed him. You know? No, that's not how you do things. Stop, please, stop. So anyway, making the point.
Thoughts, Sam?
Yeah, for me, it ends with the most important thing is the reason I have these laws is because you are all created in my image. All of you, even the person who killed somebody.
Right.
But especially the person who got killed, right? And so it's all framed with that understanding that it's God's, God created it, and the life belongs to God, not you. And so, yeah, it's interesting the concession part, because you're right. I hear a lot of people go right to this passage, especially justify capital punishment or whatever. So look, it says right here, God says we kill. I'm like, well, okay. The point is there's a reckoning, but the reckoning is not always death.
Yeah.
As we've already seen beforehand. And I think that's an important thing to keep in mind.
Yep.
Yeah. And in Torah, it's going to be more complicated than that too.
For sure.
Yep.
Yeah. And it's, as we think about self-defense issues and questions, if you want to go to a passage like this, the bad guy's got to die. Well, it's life for life. So if they break into your house, you get to break into their house. You don't get to kill them. Right?
Yeah.
Like we automatically assume that we can preemptively kill. This is not a law
Correct.
about the preemptive taking of life.
Right.
Yeah. No, you're right. It's in response to the taking of life, but it's not preemptive. That's a very good point. Very good point.
So there's a lot more to come here.
Yeah.
Yes.
But it'll have to wait for another episode.
Yep. We are at the end of our time here. So.
Oh, all right. There you go.
All right. Well, we'll pick up there next time. In the meantime, thank you so much for joining us in this episode of the After Class podcast. After Class because
The best conversations happen
After class.